Welcome to today's video where we'll be discussing the 24 to 70mm focal length in a landscape photography setting and how, for a lot of people, this could be the only lens you need to buy. This is my go-to lens for capturing landscapes, and I'd love to share a couple of tips and tricks to demonstrate the versatility of this focal range whilst capturing the outdoors, and hopefully help you get the most out of your lens. So, with that said, let's get straight into the video.
So I've just come across this scene behind me where we've got this forest path that's kind of winding up towards the rest of the trees up there. But then off to the side, we've got this low-hanging cloud that's kind of nestled in the trees, just in the tops of the trees. And then there's these trees nearer that the cloud isn't quite reaching. So that gives a real nice depth. And actually, there's two very different stories to tell here using the 24 to 70. One on the wider end and getting a nice wide shot of the path leading up to the forest. But actually, this little part of the scene up here tells its own story, and at 70mm we should be able to punch in enough to kind of isolate that. And yeah, two very different images from the exact same spot. So let's get those shots now and see how they look. I think both of those shots work quite nicely, so we will head on up further into the forest where there's a lake waiting for us. So I was just walking up the path after that last shot, and as I was coming up through the trees, I noticed the cloud is actually nestled within the forest and just kind of reaching down to the forest floor. So looking through this gap here, there's some fallen trees, and I'm thinking they may work for a nice composition. And actually, there's a nice little trick with the 24 to 70 that might be able to demonstrate up in these woods. All right, so this is a working forest, which means that once the trees reach their full growth, they're chopped down and replaced with new trees. So in this shot that I'm looking at now, we've got this stump of this tree that's been cut down a while ago. By the looks of it, it's covered in moss. The roots are now showing up through the ground. It's a nice little subject. And then behind that, we've got some juvenile trees that are just starting to grow. And then beyond that, where the cloud is falling into these vertical trees here, a well-established bit of woodland, and that's probably next on the list to be chopped down. But what we've got in this frame now, including all of those elements, is the kind of full circle of the forest. So I think it makes for a nice image. This stump here in the foreground, and this is where I'm going to show you a little trick with the 24 to 70. At 24mm, it doesn't quite look as prominent as I'd like it to look in the frame. And in this case, usually you'd reach for a wide angle lens. And by putting this towards the bottom of the frame, it would fill pretty much the bottom third of the image. And at 24mm, you just don't get that look. So you can replicate it by grabbing your tripod and taking a panoramic in a vertical motion and stitching them together in Lightroom, and you get a very similar effect as you would on a wide angle lens. So I'll try and demonstrate that for you now. So if you are going to try this for yourself, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of, and it's not just for this technique, it's for any panoramic image. You want to make sure most of your settings are on manual. So for this example, I focused on the stump because that's my main subject, and I switched it to manual focus to make sure that my camera is not shifting focus between images as I'm moving up through the scene. And for that same reason, you want to make sure you're on manual ISO, get dialed in manually and leave it there. Don't let your camera decide on your exposure, because as you're going up through the scene, in this case, it's getting brighter and brighter and your images will get darker and darker. And the more you go up, the further the forest will fall into shadow, and there's going to be a really weird shift in your images when you come to stitch them together. And then finally, pro tip, white balance. Set it manually, or if you're shooting in RAW, doesn't really matter as long as it's not on auto, because otherwise, again, as you're shifting up through the green hues of the forest floor up towards the grey sky, you're going to have a shift in white balance, and it's going to look really uneven, and there's going to be a weird colour cast change through your image as you move up through your exposures. So yeah, a couple of things to be aware of, but if you do it right, you take the time and set it up, then it's a really effective use of the 24-70 mm lens to emulate a wider angle. Oh, and just before I move on, I'm going to take one handheld exposure at 24mm so you can see the difference when using that technique versus a true 24mm focal length. Who am I to disappoint the viewers? We're getting to the lake, one way or another. Oh. Well, I'm absolutely soaked and I'm filthy, so that's good. Well, we've made it up to the lake and it's absolutely beautiful. We're much higher up now, so we've got this cloud just moving across the lake. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get the camera straight out and see if we can line a composition up. And I'm going to see if I can show you a little tip to get a little bit more out of your lens. So I've been walking up and down the edge of the lake with my camera, just looking through the viewfinder, trying to find a nice composition on the other side of the water. And I think I've landed on something. So we had the storm out here last week and it's caused a lot of chaos. It's ripped a lot of the trees down, and these trees that I'm looking at on the opposite side of the lake now, they've all been snapped in various places and it's just exposed that raw, bright, live wood inside. It creates a nice bit of contrast on the opposite side of the bank. It's a real shame to see trees get ripped down in such a fashion, but for our purposes it does make a nice image and it does tell the story of the storm that came through last week. So we'll shoot this, obviously using the cloud that's coming across to create a bit of atmosphere. There's absolutely no detail in the sky whatsoever because we're so high up, but we do have these ripples coming across the water. I am tempted to polarize them, but actually looking at the scene, I would say that the light bouncing off the water does actually create just a nice bit of texture on the bottom of the frame and just give a bit more interest to the image. So at 70mm, we're probably not cropped in quite enough to get the shot that I want to get, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about. You don't necessarily need to reach for a 70-200 to get this shot. What you can do is activate APS-C crop mode. You can do this in most modern-ish cameras, and yeah, it really helps to just get a little bit of extra reach. All it's really doing is telling the camera that you've got a crop sensor lens on, and it punches in to avoid that vignette that you get when you're using crop sensor lenses on a full frame camera. However, when you are using full frame lenses, it still has the same effect. It still punches in, and it's just a way of getting extra reach out of your 70mm lens for scenes like this when you're just a bit further away from the subject than you'd like to be. So I'll get it framed up and I'll show you what we're looking at. All right, so as you can see, I've lined up my composition. I'm quite happy with it, although I'm not cropped in as much as I'd like to be. And although you can do this in post, it's nice to visualize how it's gonna look when you're out in the field, so you can make those micro adjustments to really finish off your composition. So for me on the Sony cameras, I've assigned my custom 3 button to punch in and out of APS-C crop mode, because this is a feature I use all the time, and to have it right there at the push of a button, it's really useful. So just going to push that now so you can see how it just punches in just enough, and that will be my final composition. So we're all framed up, we're focused in, we can see the live preview on the back of the screen, so we know that we're happy with our composition, we know that we're dialed in with our focus and our exposure, so when we get back home to the editing software and we load it up onto the big screen, we go in with the confidence that we've captured the vision that we had in our head when we was out in the field. So all that's left to do now is wait for a patch of cloud to come across and we will get the shot. Right, so I'm pretty much done for the day. The cloud's starting to descend, the wind's picking up, And I think as far as this location is concerned, we're pretty much done for photography. So I'll pack my things down and we'll start heading back to the van, and we'll share a few final thoughts on the 24-70 lens as we're heading back down. Final thoughts then, should you buy a 24-70mm lens for your camera? Well, if it's the only lens you can afford to buy, then yes, absolutely. It gives you a great range of focal lengths that are definitely wide enough for the grand vistas, and it gives you a short telephoto lens for those more punched in scenes, especially when you're using the techniques that we talked about earlier in the video. You could buy something like an 18-105, which will give you an even wider focal range, but it's going to come at the cost of image quality, and you're not going to get that constant f2.8 aperture, which is what's going to give you that nice shallow depth of field. However, if you're going to be on a tripod most of the time, then you know it's not too much of a problem. Often in landscape photography, we're stopped down to f8, f11, or even further. So think about what you're going to use it for, and it might be a contender for you. Don't get me wrong, I've got a wide array of lenses, I've got wide angles, and I've got telephotos. But for my style of photography that I've kind of developed over the years, 9 times out of 10, this is the lens I'm reaching for. And if I can only bring one lens with me on a shoot, it's this one every single time. But like I say, that is the beauty of landscape photography. We all approach it in different ways, and we all have our own preferences, styles, and gear that we choose to bring with us on a shoot. Please let me know in the comments your go-to lenses, how you approach the scenes that I've approached today, and maybe I can learn a little something from you guys. And if you have learnt something from me today, feel free to drop the video a little like, it really helps. I've got other videos on the channel you might want to check out, and I'm always out doing this now. We're making videos, we're going for it. So if you want to come along for the ride, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Oh. Sick of this, man.